Here's a lab assignment problem from section 5.1. There's two parts to this. Exercise part A, estimate the area under the graph of the cosine function, the cosine of x, from 0 to pi over 2, using four approximate rectangles and right endpoints. And so they're going to ask us if it's a lower or an upper estimate. All right, so the rectangles are found by calculating the height, the width, the height times the width. The width of each rectangle, we're going to call it delta x, and the height of each rectangle is given by the function on the right-hand side of the rectangle. So we're going to add the function times delta x. Now this is going to be some even splitting, so we're going to split this up and use the endpoints x1, x2, x3. There's actually an x0 also, but what we want to do is we want to break this up to four equal pieces. So from 0 to pi over 2. So if we want to break this up to four equal pieces, we would subtract it and then divide it by 4. So subtracting it will give us pi over 2. Divided by 4, it's going to be pi over 8. So our rectangle pieces are going to be of widths of pi over 8. So now what we want to do is we want to calculate these things. And what we essentially want to do is we want to put the values. Here, let's take a look at this graph. This is the graph of the cosine function. We really just want to go from 0 to pi. So let's go from if we go from 0 to pi over 2, that might be hard to see. I mean, I suppose we can make this a little bit zoomed in so that we can see a little bit better. But let's zoom out a little bit there. So we're just looking at this this piece of the graph, and we want to break this up, or we want to see it in intervals of pi over 8. So I think if I control this and take steps of pi over 8, I can see it a little better. And here we can clearly see the rectangles and how they would fit. And so to represent the right-hand endpoints for the four subintervals, we must have the following. So x sub 0 is going to be 0, and x sub 1 is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. X sub 1 is going to be pi over 8. So it's going to give us our x values. The next one is pi over 4. And if you didn't have this graphing program, you would just start with 0 and then add pi over 8, and then add pi over 8 to pi over 8 to get pi over 4, and add pi over 8 here, and then you're going to get 3 pi over 8. And then add pi over 8, it's going to be 4 pi over 8, which is pi over 2. So those are going to be our points that we will be putting into the function, and our function is a cosine function. So we want to put these into the function and then add them all up, and then you get pi over, and then multiply by the width, which is pi over 8. All right, for this we'll pull out our calculator. It turns out that Desmos has a scientific calculator as well, so let's go ahead and use that. We have the cosine inside of parentheses, cosine of pi over 8. And then we're going to add another cosine. Let's see if we just copy and paste this. Another cosine, this time it's pi over 4. And then we'll add another cosine, this time it's 3 pi over 8. Oops, there's an addition sign here, and another addition sign, and cosine of pi over 2, which is 0. And then we'll go ahead and close the parentheses, and then we're going to multiply everything by pi over 8. So times, and then pi over 8. Okay, so it looks like our result here, so you round it off to 4 decimal places. It's going to be 1.5705, 1.5705. Okay. Okay, so I think our mistake was that we're supposed to be in radians. So let's try that again. Parentheses cosine of pi divided by 8. And let's copy this. Pi divided by 4. Plus 3 cosine of 3 pi over 8 plus cosine of pi over 2 and pi over 8. Well, it doesn't look as nice as what if we just say times and then pi over 8. Uh, 7907, well there's a 6 there, so 7908. 7908, that's point 7908. All right, so the graph of this is going to look like what? So we're using the right hand endpoints for the first point here. We're giving it a height of cosine pi over 8. So cosine pi over 8. And then our second rectangle, we're giving it a height of cosine pi over 4. So I think it's not any of these ones. I think it's going to be this second choice. And we'll go ahead and submit that, and then prepare ourselves to say that, well, if that's our choice, then it clearly looks like an underestimate. So this is an underestimate. Okay, now the second part is doing the same thing, except we're going to use the left hand side. So we're going to start off with the 0, where x naught is equal to 0, and then we're going to go as far as the 1 right before pi over 2. So if we look at the graph of that, the one before pi over 2 is 3 pi over 8. So we're going to go 0, pi over 8, pi over 4, 3 pi over 8, and then that's it. So our again our width for 4 equally spaced rectangles is going to be pi over 8. So this time we're starting with 0, and then we're going to go pi over 8, and then we're going to go add pi over 8 to that. You get pi over 4. And then 3 pi over 8. And then to our calculators now. So this is what we had for Desmos last time, but this time we're going to, instead of going to pi over 2, we're going to get rid of this, and then we're going to start off with cosine of 0. So we have a cosine of 0, cosine of pi over 8, etc. And then here we get a larger value, 4 decimal places, 1.1835. 1.1835. And there we have it. So this is larger, it's an overestimate. If we look at this first graph, our first rectangle here starts at 0. Our second rectangle is at pi over 8. So our first rectangle starts at 0. Our next rectangle is pi over 8. So it's got to be that one. And then clearly it's an overestimate. And that's it. Okay, so I hope that helps.